Welcome to this first and opening panel of today's event. I'm really pleased to welcome a fantastic panel of not just colleagues but friends, like-minded, I'm afraid. So we are actually going to be using this panel to broadcast a message and not really have a dispute, because I believe we are pretty much aligned on what we're going to say today, and we share a common vision, which we hope will also enlighten you and maybe trigger some interesting questions. So on the panel today we have Jordanka Ivanova, who unfortunately cannot join us. She experienced technical difficulties, and because of the delay she had a conflicting meeting at the European Commission, but she sends her greetings and apologizes for not being able to join online. Otherwise I would have grilled Jordanka a bit on the upcoming, actually announced, Digital Omnibus regulation that is supposed to simplify the AI Act and other related legal instruments. But we have people on the panel who could equally chip in with a critical viewpoint. We also have Michela, a dear friend and chair of the board of directors and of research and innovation at the Industry Commons Foundation. Michela has been focusing on cross-domain collaboration and enabling systems for industry. She has an amazing, impressive track record of over 30 years of innovation, and as such she has served as innovation advisor to the European Commission, the G7 leaders. She's member of President von der Leyen's European Bauhaus high-level roundtable, and she's also a member of the advisory board of CERN Idea Square. If you're not familiar with Idea Square, Google it. It's a fantastic place. She currently also serves as the president of the Knowledge Graph Alliance, the International Knowledge Graph Alliance. In 2017, Michela was awarded European Woman Innovator of the Year. We also have Cristina Boca, a friend whom I met recently at an event in The Hague, and we clicked immediately, as we like to say. But Cristina actually comes from a place that is very dear to my heart, imec and the ecosystem around it, including the KU Leuven, where I spent almost 10 years of my life. imec is a world-leading R&D hub for nanoelectronics and digital technologies. And Cristina has a background in IP strategy in licensing, but make no mistake, she is not a lawyer, as she likes to say. She is an engineer by heart, training, and experience. She also advises on complex IP matters across collaborative research, technology transfer, and innovation-driven partnerships. And her work spans software and hardware licensing, which is how we got to meet, open source compliance, and strategic IP protection in emerging technology domains. And finally, we have Marcin Olender, whom I also met recently in Brussels, of all places. Marcin is a veteran of internet policy discussions, bringing a comprehensive legal, private and public sector background to the intersection of technology and policy. He has spent a decade at Google CEE Public Policies team, and he has navigated complex landscapes of online content regulation within the European Union at a pivotal moment, because many of you would know the past 10 years have really been pivotal for the European Union. We have adopted, I believe, more than 10 regulations covering the digital domain. And he has also been working on files ranging from copyright to Digital Services Act, and is currently serving AI Chamber CEE as Director of Public Policy. So a round of applause for the panel, and we can kick it off. We're not going to have independent presentations. Rather, I think it's much more important to have an honest conversation about what's going on in Europe in the sense of regulation and how we get products from the lab to the market, which as an aspiration is a noble goal, but as a reality has, I'm afraid, failed in practice. So I would like to start. I have divided the panel in a few thematic blocks where we're going to have discussions with the panelists, but the first one is to discuss about the Europe visions of how we can turn AI policy into practical impact. And I would say that Europe has defined trust and excellence as its AI vision. Those of you who have had the courage to read the AI Act would probably gather something along these lines. But innovators, and I believe many of you sitting here in the room with us, say that there is a gap between ambitious policy and practical market outcomes. So that's where I'd like to start. Since we don't have Jordanka here, but Marcin is equally familiar with the AI Act, its development, the critical views on it and what's going on, I would like to ask him whether Marcin, as a representative of an industrial representative association, safeguarding the interests of startups and small companies, how do you think the digital rule book that we currently have supports lab to market transition? Does it really?
That's a very sneaky question. Sneaky question. You know, I think just sidetracking a little bit. You know, the two most recent Nobel economics prizes were awarded to people who delved into why societies thrive or economies thrive and innovate. And I feel they're kind of winking at us here in Europe, saying, hey, these things are actually important and you can influence this. This is what Darren Acemoglu basically says, right? That it's up to institutions that we build, which means not just buildings and commissions and stuff, but the legal institutions, the way we set up society, that has an impact on how the economy works. It's not given, it's made by us. So this is the basic message of these scholars. And if we look at Europe, that was the source of this, you know, the new science, enlightenment, technical revolution. We created all of this and we were the forefront of technology for a long time, and now we're not, right? Because I don't think anyone has any doubts anymore that Europe is not where things are the most advanced, where the innovation thrives the best. It's either the US, China, some other Asian countries also are competing in this space, but Europe, of course, there's great things in Europe happening as well, right? There's like imec, for example, but so, you know, let's not go completely doomy and gloomy, but we've lost some edge, right? We are no longer setting the stage, we are trailing. We are trying to catch up. Even the official European documents confirm this, right? That we are playing catch up, we're trying to regain competitiveness, regain the innovation advantage. So something went wrong. Something went at one point. What is it? It's probably many different things, but unfortunately what you mentioned sneakily in your question, the regulation issues, is something we definitely need to look into, and I think it's now officially even admitted by the European Commission that they've gone too far, since they are publishing, this is I think the 4th or 5th omnibus, the first digital one, but I think it's now beyond any debate that we have gone too far. As you said, more than 10. I stopped counting. I think it's about 15 maybe or 17 even acts. Some of them kind of superseded the previous ones, like we had a fairness in business relation regulation that didn't even enter into force before they started working on the DMA, the Digital Markets Act. So things are going so far, we're going so fast with the regulation that they even couldn't wait for the acts that are already enacted to enter into force. They already began work on the next one. So we had a deluge of these acts. Some of them are still entering into force slow, like the AI Act. It's not entirely yet effective. Different provisions are coming into force. So whether it's going to be another nail in the coffin, so to speak, is still up for debate. And actually there's now a very significant push, and we are part of it, to delay the entry into force of the provisions that are still pending, just to give us some time, to better reflect on whether this is going the right direction, but perhaps not, and adjust. So, you know, any business, and I was a civil servant before. I'm not sure that really resonated. So I went from civil service to business, and now a business organization. So I kind of know two sides of this whole debate. But for the 10 years I spent, or 11 maybe now, years I spent on the business side, arguing, look, you are regulating too much, this is going to cost us, the business side, a lot, this is going to slow down innovation. Everybody ignored us for 10 years, like all the businesses. Oh, you were just saying this, business always says that, you'll be fine, you'll deal with it. I mean, it's nothing, right? It's going to be great, and we have these values, and they are more important. And at one point, we just went too far. Every piece of legislation adds a certain burden on companies. It's not like we're going to go out of business because of GDPR, right? But GDPR costs many, many hundreds of millions of euros across Europe to implement and keep up to date, etc. And then you add Data Governance Act, and then you add Data Act, and then you add AI Act, and then you add, and suddenly Cybersecurity Act, the NIS Directive, and you get a layered cake of regulation that suddenly, if one adds 1% to the costs and subtracts 1% to the things you can do, because you just, some things are too risky or illegal or so, and then you get a compounding effect on business. And we've gone too far. We have the omnibus as a small, tiny little step back, but maybe it's the first step in hopefully it's the first step of many that we will take to get rid of this mountain of over-regulation.
Thank you. I had a very interesting chat this morning with a fellow journalist who asked me, do you really believe that we could simplify regulation with another regulation? And I would like to ask Cristina, because this morning in the speech of the Bulgarian representative to the European Commission, it was mentioned that we are now adopting, or planning to adopt, it hasn't been announced yet, the version of the so-called European Innovation Act, which aims to set incentives for investment, for development of technology hubs, much like what we know from the US. But Cristina, you come from imec, a huge R&D organization, and imec has been particularly vocal about the role of the CHIPS Act, for example, that was adopted several years ago with a similar, I would say, ambition in the semiconductor industry. Was the CHIPS Act successful, and do you believe that something that follows largely the same objectives under the name of European Innovation Act stands a chance?
Maybe we should first start by defining what is successful. So it's a little bit of a mix. There is a lot of funding being made available, but on the other hand, you have a lot of restrictions. So for example, for us at imec, it's a little bit difficult to navigate all the restrictions because we are working with a lot of partners in a lot of countries. And now we don't only have to handle our own CHIP Act, but we also have to handle its equivalent in US, which makes that our partners and partner universities in US are also fighting with similar restrictions. So you get the money to do the research, but you cannot actually use it, strictly speaking, with some of the partners. Because from one day, there is also not a very good vision on when somebody is going to change from the friendly to the unfriendly list. And this makes a long-time strategy quite difficult. And it's all about strategy, which I think we all agree that sometimes in Europe seems to lack the whole thing. It's a very reaction kind of movement. Every time we are reacting on stuff and we are not thinking strategically. And getting back to what Marcin was saying, we have a lot of regulations. We've seen now the impact of GDPR. For example, it took more than 5 years until there were some ideas on how to implement it in a decent way. And now you can say, yeah, it's kind of working. Everybody knows what they need to do. But we have the cybersecurity regulations coming in now. How are we going to blend that also? We have the Data Act, and okay, at imec we are not so impacted by that, but imagine all the industry that has the smart devices, and they will have to blend. And it's the whole navigating in between all this regulation. It's, yeah, omnibus. Okay, I will have to read it. I already admitted that I didn't have time to read it yet. I honestly don't believe that it's going to fix stuff because it's so many things we have to balance and to practically implement, and I think there is a little bit of a fracture between the theoretical of the legislation and how we should implement it. And the Innovation Act, yeah, I'm going to hold my breath on that one. I'm still waiting to see how we implement all the things that have been dumped to now. So yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it?
Please, Michela.
I mean, this is mind-boggling. You know, we have been pioneering things in Europe for ages. We were doing experiments with generative AI, big pilot projects. 2014, we were feeding policy directly from experimentation that combined expertise from all the different domains, areas of knowledge, and it was showing very clear pointers to what's required in these new framework conditions. One of our main, the top recommendation from the Connect Advisory Forum, DG Connect, was to Commissioner Oettinger to introduce market adoption readiness levels. This was in addition to the technology readiness levels. We were adding layers of assessment of risk of an application. We're working with AI at this point, right? This is 11 years ago, 12 years ago now. And then we are looking at how many early adopters and how much data can we yield from early adoption and what can we learn from this. And we knew already, I mean, I remember a case because I was London-based, of a company selling for a huge amount of money in 2007 purely on the amount of data that it had accumulated about users. Already in 2007, we knew that investors will come in and invest in early stages. In Euro speak, we could say TRL 3-4, something like that, because of the amount of data that was accumulated. This was the recommendation number 1, introduced market adoption readiness levels into these systems. The irony is, currently, all of us here are part of a gigantic AI demo that's been imposed on us. All of us are part of it. All of us are early adopters whose data is being accumulated to raise more money for this giant AI demo. So the very market adoption readiness levels are being used right now and tested on us. And basically, what we are advocating for in Europe and what we have been advocating is to do this very thing, but in controlled environments. Because what we are being exposed to is high levels of risk, of course, with this current demo, giant AI demo. And what we want to do is stimulate more test and experimentation facilities, trusted research environments that we are now building in different areas where we can do the very same thing, but we can get early investment by constructing these environments in the correct way and involving regulators from the beginning where they can make informed decisions. If anything, there's one thing I would say from the Industry Commons Foundation perspective, I've been advocating for this for 10 years now. Introduce systems of agreements into the data tests and experiments as data formats that are optimized in the same way, because basically we need to respond to the framework conditions. So if you are going to introduce regulation in the same way as you introduce all the other data models into the system, systems of agreement, systems of resilience, systems of responsibility, etc., then you need to do it in iterative ways in which that the way that digital technologies are developed. And if you're going to do it in iterative ways, you have to be present at all the stages of tech transfer and deployment, and then you will make informed decisions. I would say that I'm actually very impressed by our colleagues from Japan. They probably think it's a hindrance that they have to go through very lengthy processes in regulating, because that's what their system dictates. And we have been working, thanks to the IDSA, with colleagues from Atsumi and Sakai, who are working with the University of Tokyo, also in advising the government. And they say to us, we have to take our time over legislation. Usually it's 3 years. At the quickest we can do 18 months. That means we have to look at what are our current legislations in place that regulate society, because they're there for a reason. And how do these new framework conditions fit into our bird's eye view of what the society should be about? Now that is missing. What are we doing in Europe? We're doing this knee-jerk reactions, big hype. Oh, let's just get in there and regulate quickly. Where is our overall vision and our roadmap of where the society, how do these framework conditions now fit into what we want to achieve as a society? We need to have that dimension. So I think actually, even though perhaps in Japan certain companies will be frustrated they don't have legislation quickly, actually this is a very important dimension, we cannot jump into this. We need to witness what's possible. We need to see. We have been feeding policy from the grassroots experimentation for years. Look at all the evidence. 74% of the Connect Advisory Forum thinks for the innovation recommendations for the European Commission came directly from experimentation on the ground.
Do you believe we're obsessed with precaution? And for people in the audience without background, precautionary principle is an epistemic framework in law, which essentially means when we don't have sufficient scientific evidence of whether something is harmful or not, we take a wait-and-see position. And I'm afraid that in regulation, we are essentially obsessed with the idea that any sort of technology that we deploy will present an insurmountable risk to the safety, well-being, and fundamental rights of citizens, which obviously with systems like ChatGPT we know is the case indeed. But how can we still keep the benefits of precaution and combine this with pragmatic implementation?
It's a difficult question, of course, because we still need to stay cautious. I think we should do it in a smarter way. I think we should have both long-term approaches to it, and I don't think necessarily having a reaction is something bad. It's just that in our legislative process simply in Europe, it's a complicated one. It takes a long time to reach a consensus. And the problem is if you want to ever do an adjustment based on the reality, then you restart the whole process. We do not have a quick reaction system in Europe for that. And I think this is where we are sort of, I would not call it exactly losing, but I will just say in a software, AI is pure software. Sorry to put it so bluntly. Software is obsolete in 3 years. Basically, that's the basis of any software company. They will always assume that if by the passage of 3 years your software basis is not entirely renewed, then you are either a bank still working in Fortran or COBOL, which is possible. But in nowadays companies, it's the difference between succeeding and failing is about probably 12 months. I might be a little bit too short in it, but I think simply from software point of view, AI has a similar cyclus. So if you look at the evolution, okay, we should not buy the hype of our, how should I call them, friends across the pond who are looking, who are overhyping AI simply because they look at their shares and they want, if I'm correct, we were already going to have perfectly capable agents already in the beginning of this year. We are not there yet. AGI was also here in the beginning of the year. We are not there yet. We should not overestimate, but we should also be realistic and try to correctly adapt our laws, and our reaction is simply too slow. We need so much time to implement, and then if we need a small adjustment, and I think GDPR is the biggest example we have. We already failed, let's put it like that, once, because what Marcin says is perfectly correct. There were a lot of companies that lost a lot of money. I think we should find a way to learn from whatever we are doing as mistakes now. So if a company does something wrong, because they try to advance, don't punish, try to learn from it. And we are such a punitive system, which is for me frustrating, because I'm a software engineer, I like to experiment, and it's part of, and I understand, you know it, but I'm very cautious about the legal rigors and all the liabilities that are associated with it, but we have to find a middle way. Otherwise, we are going to get stuck, and I think it's a problem.
I mean, that's absolutely simple logic. If doing something is more risky, less people will do it. Right? As what you said. So the balance between, of course, there are some things that are very risky and should be done cautiously, but you know, a chatbot, I mean, what sort of risk are we talking about? It's blown completely out of proportion in Europe. Like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Our society's going to crash. No, it's not. It's just a bloody chatbot. You know, let's be realistic, and everything has a price. And risk has a great price. And this is what I told the minister back in Poland. It's like, if what you are creating right now, I mean, the ship has sailed because we got the AI Act, but we still have the local implementations that could be worse or better. But the bottom line is, if you are saying through this AI Act that if you employ, because it just, you know, AI Act is not only for the creators, for the makers of AI systems, but also for deployers. So if you're even, by using AI, you're incurring an additional layer of risk, because it's not just bureaucracy, it's also risk, right? You can be legally held liable for X, Y, Z, and if you don't do AI, you will not. I mean, what kind of a message is this to people? Yeah? AI is risky. Don't do it. It's going to cost you, and you can be, you know, fined. You can have these people from the AI Control Bureau, because, you know, every country now has to set up an AI Control Bureau, yes, with many bureaucrats positions. And you know what I mean? It's just, is that the way we do legislation? I just love the professor's presentation. Technology is your friend. We lost that ideology. Yeah? We started looking at technology as a potential source of risks. I mean, you know, the creators of the Manhattan Project, they didn't know the Earth wasn't going to blow up. I mean, there was the risk there that the chain reaction would continue endlessly. They considered this, but they said, you know, let's go, let's see what happens, and we've lost that feeling, I think, as a society. Why? Because we maybe some, at least in the West, because we talked yesterday that we have a slightly different viewpoint here in this part of the world. But the Western Europe is like, okay, we've reached the pinnacle of development. You know, this is as good as it gets, and anything that upsets this balance we view as a danger. Yeah, so we got to put shackles on it. We got to try and limit it, because it's you know, it could mean that someone loses, right? So we are so afraid that someone would, an industry, for example, we don't want to upset existing industries. You know, you mentioned Commissioner Oettinger, my least favorite commissioner probably ever, who was so bent on protecting the newspaper industry, right? Because of his friends at Axel Springer. And that is the ideology of what we're doing, many things in Europe. Yeah, we don't want to upset the balance. We don't want to upset existing relationships. Yeah, so on the risk aversion front, yeah, we definitely. The question is, can we move back? Because it's not easy to change mentality, right? You can change a piece of legislation, but how do you change a whole mindset that is risk averse, innovation averse, that wants to protect what we have and wants to limit what the new stuff that can come in. You know, I think it was Machiavelli that said that innovation will always have many enemies. The new will always have enemies because it upsets the status quo, right? And in Europe, this is very apparent, that the status quo is very strong, and the people who want to change it have an uphill battle.
But, you know, fear is directly connected to ignorance. So it means the more we can enable knowledge sharing and information, people to be making well-informed decisions. I mean, that's really our ambition. And also, I mean, we do have intelligence in Europe. So if you don't jump on the bandwagon, in fact, you know, you were saying people are not exposed to the failures of companies and they should actually learn from those. Yes, they should. They should also learn from brilliant implementations that are successful, but they're not exposed to that knowledge. I can give you a very, very good example, if you will allow me, if we have the time. In one of our test and experimentation labs, we had the IKEA team there. So head of digital product, head of data ethics, chief ontologist, and chief knowledge owner, who knows the catalog intimately. The starting premise from the IKEA perspective, of course we had all the experts in the room, like big ontology builders, like people who have built ontologies for the US defense, and very, very big experts in the room who could also advise on the process. But the IKEA starting point was, if I walk into an IKEA physical store, I don't want someone stalking me and trying to guess what I want to buy and asking me what's my shoe size. I actually want to approach someone who's intelligent and ask them a couple of questions and be pointed to the product, because that's a good user experience. I want the same experience online. So I don't want to come to the website and be having GDPR pop-up windows and threats of taking all my data away, where once I've just kind of, for the sake of getting rid of the nuisance, I sign my life away effectively. I say, yeah, take all my data. Yeah, you have now a legal obligation to take all my data because I've given it to you, right? So we don't want that experience. It's not a good user experience. So we're going to enter the store. We're going to build, over 3 days, we built a prototype, a live demo over the existing digital portal, which is franchised throughout the world, throughout IKEA interglobal systems, where a customer comes in and is asked a couple of simple questions, no pop-ups, no data being taken from them. They manage their own data, and it's taken directly to the results. Why? Because for the previous 6 months, they built the IKEA knowledge graph, which was machine-readable knowledge about the entire catalog that could deliver the results. Now, the main thing that the management wanted from IKEA was to have quick time to market. That's a huge value that they attribute to their operations. In half a day, a new category requested by a customer was implemented by the knowledge owner in the correct part of the knowledge graph. We reconnected, or they reconnected, the IKEA team did all this is IKEA intelligence. Reconnected all of this, tested it, and it was able to run. Now, this is the important part. It would have taken them, apparently, and this is directly coming from the IKEA team, 6 months of an army of people of re-tagging every single product, or retraining models in the cloud, and huge amount of storage of big data in the cloud and data models, huge amount of data carbon footprint. So not only did they approach the subject matter from the ethics perspective, then they delivered on the mission for the management, faster time to market, but inadvertently optimized the process, saved on human effort, on data processing, on big data, and on data carbon footprint. And then this system got rolled out across IKEA interglobal systems. If I go to IKEA, the IKEA portal in Sweden, I don't get a GDPR pop-up window anymore. And the regulators should be in the room when this happens, shouldn't they?
They should. Isn't that why we are trying to invent, or rather implant, because they come from elsewhere, regulatory sandboxes into, for example, they now feature in the AI Act, they also feature in the Cyber Resilience Act, the Interoperable Europe Act and whatnot. And believe me, they all sound different. The Commission, I've asked, they don't have a good answer as to why these frameworks look different in these different acts. What they aim to do, though, is essentially create controlled environments where companies can come, test, experiment, allegedly, and play with technology in a sandbox. But we had a discussion with Cristina earlier. Those of you who don't know, actually the sandbox concept comes from computer security. It's essentially an isolated environment from all the other system processes where you can play and experiment with an application without interfering with the overall system's performance. Can we have something like that in regulation, Cristina? How do you see that? I mean, is that even feasible? Because the ambition that now the Commission pursues with regulatory sandboxing is actually underwhelming. I mean, we don't have any incentives, real incentives for companies to join. The only thing we can offer is essentially, okay, you can run your system and it will not be considered as being placed on the market. But other than that, we don't have any other incentives. You cannot really go wild, if you will.
I think we go back to my previous answer then. I think, first of all, the sandboxes as they are now presented, they are a little bit, I do not see entirely the utility there, because the practicality, how do you actually use them? How are you supposed to migrate from being in a sandbox to a real-life system? And it's one thing to have a technical sandbox, which is perfect, ideal. We do that all the time in software engineering. If you don't do it, then you are not a good software engineer anyway. But I think we should really have somehow a feedback loop towards the legislator. What did we learn there? What can we do to speed up the process of legislation following up with what we learned in these sandboxes? And we have now, it's not exactly a sandbox, but I think I find that we already have a quite an interesting and good initiative with the test beds that are being deployed everywhere in Europe. There is a lot of funding being made available for that. if we are smart, then we should combine maybe the two. So if we would find a way in which these testbeds, for example, could be used for experimentation and even being the equivalent of some sandboxes from which we could learn, I think it might be some useful money, because there's really a lot of European money being pumped in testbeds. I think I've heard of so many testbeds the last 2 to 3 years. Honestly, it's amazing. I think even deploy EMDS is actually officially considered a testbed. I know because we have our Flanders implementation in it also. So there is some initiative. I don't see the coherence and I don't see the feedback loop. So I'm a software engineer. For me, you open an issue, you solve the bug, and then you merge that back into your repository. The whole merging back in the repository, I do not see. I do not see where we are learning from it, from the process. It's so theoretically thought of, and I think there's where we have a little bit of a disconnect. So, but that's the software engineer in me talking and dreaming that we will get somewhere.
But generally, a software any engineer looking at the legal system must feel very, very conflicted, because none of this makes sense, right? Even if you look at the sandboxes as a concept, what does that really mean? It means that the legislator knows that it's created a bad product, so it creates a loophole, a kind of a box where you can not use that bad product and then exist for a while. So it kind of already is admitting that the legislation is so bad that probably no one will be able to live or develop their product without the sandbox. So the sandbox is a kind of admittance to failure when you look from my perspective. But you know, it's good that we have them, because it is a little bit of an event, right? Whether they're going to be effective, they haven't been very effective so far, because as you said, they don't offer much advantage. Like if it was just a very simple thing, I'm going to go to my regulator, I'm going to say, hey, look, I want to be in the sandbox, meaning I can deploy and I will tell you about it, and you can kind of take a look at what I'm doing, but you offer me immunity because I told you what I'm doing and I gave you like a forewarning. Yeah, that could make sense, but that's not really how they work so far. Let's see how they develop. So, you know, that's the European way of doing things. We first screw up the market, and then we try to, you know, add an agency to deal with that, or some add grants or sandboxes, right? Instead of fixing the original problem, which is a bad legislation or bad business environment. We try to put band-aids on, you know, on the patient, which is just dealing with the symptoms, not the underlying issues. So I'm not a fan, but it's you know, it's something. So we live in a reality where we go, yeah, sandboxes. It's like shouldn't be this way.
In fact, I completely agree with you. In fact, at GATE, we are now advocating for a national framework for sandboxes, which is aligned with the AI Act, but on top of it offers a broad and enabling experimentation framework, which any member state should be at ease to adopt. In fact, in an earlier draft of the AI Act, before it was completely messed up by the European Parliament, there was something in that regard. There was some sort of immunity or, you know, like an exit letter of compliance from the regulator, which protects the company once it exits the sandbox. This is gone. It doesn't feature in the current version of the Act. But we believe that this could only work if it's complemented by an experimentation framework which enables companies to test under enabling conditions without having to think all the time whether they might be in breach of one of the 15, 20 or 100 regulations they are anyway supposed to address. And I wonder, Michela, in your experience working with prototyping essentially and experimentation, do you think we can, I mean, such experimentation frameworks can learn from that experience that you talked about earlier? Like, for example, how would the IKEA demo play out in a sandbox? Like, they could, for example, play with a machine learning model. They would find out it's not suitable. Then they would turn to a knowledge graph, for example. And
I can tell you immediately how it played out. I mean, there's a major member of the IDSA, a major organization actually, that has adopted the same approach, not in the B2C, but in the B2B environment, because they saw the example of IKEA, and they could see immediately that, originally IKEA management had no clue what people were talking about when they said, we're going to employ a chief ontologist. What's that? So basically, what's in it for us? So basically, you need to demonstrate the capability to the management and then actually show them the benefits and the ROI. And then you have one example where something's been implemented, which is actually a proper knowledge reference. I will give you an example also of the health sector that we're working with now, and as you well know, and thanks to Bulgarian intelligence and the collaboration between GATE and our Swedish partners at Chalmers Industry Technique and us at the Industry Commons Foundation, we have just published a white paper for the new Swedish trusted research environment for healthcare AI. The way that we onboarded the people like AstraZeneca to be part of this was literally last year. We asked, we did some tests in sort of a safe testing environment. We were asking very simple questions to large language models. So, for example, draw me a couple where a woman is taller than the man. Couldn't do it. Could not do it, no matter how many ways you asked. And of course, the AstraZeneca's people, their jaws dropped. They went, well, hang on a second. I mean, if we can't do that, then how is he going to handle kind of complex issues of healthcare and clinical user testing and whatever else? And of course, I mean, since then, we've been, they've kind of weighed it, adjusted it. But at that time, if they could have just asked an ontology, a knowledge graph that maps out, human knowledge, it would have immediately have known that the probabilistic thing that's on the nasty kind of prejudiced web sort of information, huge web information that basically tells you our societal model is not such that we'd ever represent a woman taller than a man, so we don't have those pictures, basically. It would be taught, well, of course you can have it, and of course it's possible. And it's so simple. It's unbelievably simple, and you just go, why? Why don't we have these hybrid systems that cross-reference knowledge where we map out knowledge correctly? We've been working on ontology ecosystems for years now, and all the big companies like Airbus have ontologies embedded in their stack. So it's a model that has to exist. You need to know what your knowledge in your company, what the actual relationships are. And then you can use you can build other models that reference knowledge correctly. So as I say, we're part of this giant demo that's actually really a bit kind of risky and wonky, and it's doing things in one way. But there are solutions that once you're exposed to them, once you see the power of them, everybody jumps on board and says, hang on a second, we should have one of those. So if you're part of this kind of sandbox that actually is conducting experiments, is demonstrating from actual use cases, modeled on real existing systems like IKEA, that was modeled on top of the website, on top of the actual live catalog. The experiments that were conducted with the large company as part of our manufacturing value networks is also with their real supply chain data under very strict conditions, of course. But these are things that really work because they are working with real use case scenarios, with real data. And then if you can see how well they work, you can go and test it yourself and apply it to your scenarios. I mean, it's a no-brainer for me.
I have, as a software engineer again, 2 observations where we have a principle which is called garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's perfect, it works for AI, it's the perfect demonstration of it. Second of all, AI and the way the algorithms are trained, we are looking for mathematical optimization. We are not having any kind of correlations in the way we are doing the correlations. And I think this is the wrong assumption that people make nowadays with AI in general. I think we should really do more about explainability, trying to find out what's in the box. And I think the best example, I don't know if everybody knows it, there was one of the earliest labeling systems or trainings. They were trying to label malamuts. So they showed it was a very simple algorithm. So they were showing a photo with a malamut and we're saying, yes, this is a malamut, this is not a malamut. After a while, they asked the system, okay, you get now a photo, and there was a cat. And the system said, yes, it's a Malamute. Do you want to know why? Because the cat was in the snow. So the system made the connection with the labeling was actually wrong, didn't label it on the animal the system was presenting, but was being presented, but made the connection with the fact that the Malamutes, of course, statistically speaking, they are mostly in snow. So we do not know entirely how these connections are being made. We are starting with the assumption that the similar connections are being made, and then you have the two problems, the bias, which we have, societal bias, we have it everywhere, and I think this is where you will see quite a lot of problems. For example, in medical sciences, you have that quite often having an impact on the final quality of your AI system. So I think we should try to understand more about it, because mathematics is wonderful, but optimization only works to finding a local minimum. No matter how you look at it, it's never going to be the global one.
So it's an example of this. This is really great. And sorry if you will allow me, because obviously we didn't pass it over to Marcin. There's a really great example, a sister project of us. So we're part of the digital health arena, and the CIT is managing Chalmers Industry Technique. But there's a sister project in Sweden where they've looked at synthetic data. And they looked at when you kind of, what is normalization in software, right? So very good question, isn't it? So you take a data set, because you want to strip it of any information that will have any pointers to being able to describe a person or relate to a person or use case, right? So what you do is you take a data set, strip it of any peaks and troughs, so anything that spikes up or down, and you normalize it. What does normalization mean, right? Who has set the criteria of what is normal? It's a very good question. What happened was they took a diverse set from healthcare, wanted to strip it of all the data because the healthcare companies want to work with synthetic data. That's the way that they can work. And they realized suddenly it was massively biased towards white middle-aged men. And it was turned into a biased data set by being synthesized. So this is something that's really important. Now, it's important to realize that every data set is biased. There's no such thing as unbiased data. However, if you build knowledge about it, which is why we introduced this strategy of just data annotation, it's already been in the European recommendations, particularly introduced by the European Open Science Cloud, which is a federated system that is looking at the various different strategies, and as you well know, is a platform that very much supported the evolution of fair data technologies. So technologies that are findable, interoperable, accessible, or reusable. I got it the wrong way around, but never mind. Anyway, fair data technologies, and this is a system that's adopted by everybody. But industry said to us when we were doing the study on the expansion of EOSC, does that mean it's fair to people? Well, no, these are fair technologies. So what we actually need is to have just data practice that matches fair, and this has been introduced in the Strategic Research Innovation Agenda by the EOSC since 2021, which is that we need data practice that's judicious, unbiased, safe, and transparent. Why? Not only because we are responsible and we have a very, very big, unique selling proposition from Europe to actually create systems with responsible data. Not because we are responsible to the citizen, we are responsible to the citizen to do this, but because it's hugely profitable. The knowledge about the data is more valuable than data themselves. Absolutely. If we build systems that build knowledge about the data, the way that data sets are used in various, from clinical use cases to operational use cases, production use cases, whatever. And the biases in data will behave differently in the different use cases. The more of that knowledge we build in a shared platform of just data practice, the more informed decisions we can make of how to deploy that data. We can optimize the deployment. We will know that it will work rather than throwing a huge amount of data at something that we don't know whether it will work and we get unknown unknowns. It's far more optimized, far more profitable, and we can use it in more effective ways. This is where we have a huge advantage in Europe by implementing just data systems.
And that's what we call evidence-based. regulation, essentially, which is one of the main objectives of the AI Act and regulatory sandboxes in particular. We want to inform policy based on testing experimentation like this. But if we only do controlled testing experimentation, then we only get controlled evidence-based regulation, which is not, I'm afraid, not what we are looking for. And very, very importantly, something that both Cristina and Michela raised, I'm afraid that we've become a bit lazy with machine learning, because if you think about it, the original approach to AI was precisely about knowledge implementation and inference. And knowledge representation, back in the days of symbolic AI, used to take a long time and effort and even domain expertise of modeling ontologies and building knowledge graphs. I think we should definitely try and go back to that and really put our brains to work, because I'm concerned that the almost black art of machine learning engineering is dumbing people down. Now, I would like to open the floor to questions from the audience, because we've had an interesting discussion, and I would like to see whether that has sparked. All right, please.
Hello. I've been coding for the past 4 years with Swift and lately with Python. So in the software engineering part, I'm mostly a designer. So I'm looking now with the AI systems. But what I'm really curious, because Bulgarian is not a language of any native software language. And for me, that's one of the biggest issues with the future of maybe languages and culture. How do we preserve native languages in this era where everyone is coding in English? And do you think there is a chance to help the kids adopt skills to code in this area? And how do we do that? Thank you.
That's a very complex question indeed. I can tell you, so from my biography,
and
maybe it's not.
Is it through regulation?
No, it's not. So I'm Romanian, but I live in Belgium now for 25 years. I can tell you what the Flemish government is doing. They are actively working on encouraging the use of Flemish. You might think that's not nationalistic. Of course, if you see the news, our minister right now, it's a little bit towards the extreme right. But it's something that has been happening for a while. So for example, now there is a very big effort to try to build Flemish language models, so extending the existing language models. There are efforts to try to increase the literacy, so digital literacy in general, so programs directly towards a younger audience, to both understand digital things, but also the importance of the language and making them accessible in the local language, which is indeed not the most straightforward thing. There are projects in which there is a lot of effort being made, for example, in better translations. So in Flemish, in Flanders, there is a very big problem, or not. I'm Romanian, I don't consider it a big problem. But there is a very broad use of English. Really, English is the lingua franca of almost all Flemish people. I don't think I know any Flemish person that doesn't speak English, except if they are above their 60s, 70s when they speak French. So there is a tendency for them to be very accommodating to other people and to speak English. And then you kind of indeed are more tempted to look for English content. You lose that searching for the content in your own language, which is also lower quality, simply because the audience is so restricted. Think about the fact that there are probably somewhere around 8 million speakers of Flemish and Dutch, or maybe 10 million somewhere. They have a common body, but Flemish is very specific. It has a different, despite the fact that it's technically Dutch. but it's like a dialect almost, and that's being lost. So I think it's a similar problem with Bulgarian you would have, and I think also with Romanian. A lot of the younger people tend not to use Romanian anymore because, I mean, everybody speaks English nowadays. And it's a very difficult exercise, and I don't think we can fix it with the legislation. I honestly do not believe that legislation can help this. I think it should be an effort to try to preserve as much as possible of what we have, because at a certain moment we will lose it. It's also easier for people to only speak one language. It's a progress. It's going to contradict me now.
Yes, I'm going to finally contradict you, because aren't we? Because I'm thinking to myself, I'm trying to teach English my kids. I'm trying to raise them up as bilingual. But I'm thinking, how do we convince people to learn foreign languages when we got AI now? I mean, that's what's worrying me. It's a great exercise. It's great for the brain. But how do we convince the people if we can have it's already there. It's just a little bit clunky sometimes, but we can have a universal translating. Has anyone, watched Star Trek or something, right? We had these science fiction things that all these aliens could talk to each other, and we actually have this technology, right? We have to slightly, polish the edges, but it's there. It's here already. How do we get people learning languages? I mean, that's what worries me. Not the fact that we're going to forget our own language. I think we can. Actually, in this particular case, I'm super optimistic about the AI being, stop people from, using English. Why? But what we need to do is make sure our local languages are well represented in the models, and that's
the representation and the regulation to help with the equal access to those models. So each EU language is the same level represented across the services.
That's one of my favorite discussions, but I don't think we have the space here.
I would allow one more question. I think the gentleman in the back was first. So.
Actually, the regulatory discussion is never-ending story, especially if you are a lawyer. But I'm coming from one of the most regulatory sectors, and this is the healthcare. What is your personal feeling, each one of you, regarding the integration of the regulations, especially the AI Act, together with all of the other European policies, for instance, the European Health Data Space, and all of the other very important health acts, but also this is reflecting to the social and the regulatory policies. And the most important here is, what is your feeling for integration into the member state practices?
15 seconds.
Yeah. So I don't know if did you want me to jump in? Because basically, as I said to you earlier, it is actually a collaboration between us to create the new trusted research environment for healthcare AI for Sweden. And we have the number one recommendation is to integrate regulators into the space. From the beginning, for all the reasons that I already explained, so I'm not going to repeat myself, absolutely important that you are part, your intelligence, and I don't mean policing, because that's not useful. What I mean is intelligence from the legal domain that is part of the exchange of knowledge in this space, so that we can also get, the companies that are developing these systems can also have an insight into the sort of aspects they need to consider, but also that you can make informed decisions based on what you're witnessing. That's just extremely important. There are layers to this. There are layers of supporting measures. So one is, for example, this Just Data system, which is supported with a system that allows Just Data annotation, so that you can annotate the data sets that everybody is working with. So you could annotate them from the legal perspective, for example, and you would insert that piece of knowledge into the shared knowledge, so that everybody, all the stakeholders who are participating, they would have access to the same contextual information. This is super powerful. Then, of course, we have something that else that might be of interest to you, which is that we introduced this model called transfer IP. It's transferable intellectual property. It is effectively extended to a governance system. It's a system where we share our agreements and the ways that we work with each other, and also everything that's ported from lab all the way to market. We can track it and trace it and manage it correctly. This is another very powerful mechanism that we already suggested in 2014 when we first started testing, because it was the first thing that appeared after 2 years, between 2012 and 2014, of conducting experiments. The thing that was very, very clear was tracking of intellectual property in these value networks. Really important, it empowers everybody. So that's the third one. Another one is something we call innovation commons, a set of shared knowledge and tools. So for example, some of the synthetic data sets that work can be used by other members of the other participants in the ecosystem. There's ready tools, ready models, templates, IP templates or legal templates and things like that. We can share. There's absolutely no need to have each one of us develop them separately. Then what we do is we introduce a validation airlock for exporting an AI model. We call it a pre-flight validation airlock. So we model it on the idea that before you take a flight, you do a check. And you check whether all of your agreements are in place, whether all of your safety measures are in place, where the computing power is possible for what you're trying to do, etc. You look at what it will take. All of those elements are exported in this validation airlock, so you can do a final check and say, yes, this is safe for export. And finally, what we do is we are recommending is deployment stewardship. So basically, we monitor deployment and we feed that data back into the TRE, something that Ivo has called the health report for the health sector. So basically, we see how healthy the model is as we take it out. So we've actually, these are the enablers, and you need to be part of it. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Could I just add a sentence?
Just a sentence.
That just sounded really, really complicated. And healthcare is one of the, this is a huge question. Like, do we allow healthcare more in order to reach more efficiency, which, for example, could mean finding a cure for cancer, right, quicker? Or do we lean on the safety side, make sure no harm ever does? So this is one of the a very good question. I would, of course, hey, I want the cure for cancer, okay? But,
we take this over lunch, I'm afraid, because my colleagues from the research panel are looking at me. So I would like to thank the panelists and make a few quick announcements before the round of applause that I'm going to ask for. 2 announcements of the Experimental Governance Lab. We are finally launching our GATE Sandbox in February 2026. Applications are open as of today, officially as the 1st of December, but if you were actually to visit that, the link in the QR code, you could already apply. It's a lengthy questionnaire that was prepared by the lab team. And the idea of this testing process is essentially that you go through this real life testing of your product, technology, business model from the vantage point of the AI Act and other related instruments of GDPR, copyright law, and so on, so that we can help you understand and evaluate the impact, but also to communicate this back to the state, which is now at a critical point of figuring out the framework for regulatory sandboxes. So using that sandbox, we want to prototype together with you, the business, the innovators, the future model of the Bulgarian sandbox, which we hope is going to be useful to you. Second announcement, something that Professor Ilieva mentioned in her keynote earlier today. We are launching our next generation AI training in partnership with Ethermind. You could once again sign up, express your interest. We are launching these trainings in January 2026. And they combine human expertise with the best state-of-the-art AI knowledge agents. I hope that was interesting to you. I would like to ask for a round of applause for. Yes.
Which is basically for the risk, at the risk of being accused of having the final word, which I will hand back to you. If I explain to you how an airplane works, it will be complicated, right? But you still want to land safely, right? There you go.
Thank you.